To me, one story, if you take a step back from it and just say, that's interesting. In 2008 was the year that an African American and a woman, one of the two most likely will be either president or vice president. That's a sign of some change is happening, regardless of what they believe. It's a sign there are changes happening. In our business, in the advertising business, it's going through a lot of really dramatic changes. It started with TiVo, when they said, okay, people don't have to watch your TV spots anymore. They just go right past it. That was a little bit of a, there was about 4 years where everybody was freaking out. And then it became the fact that people aren't really watching as much TV. You're spending more time online. And then there's the fact that media is so fragmented. It used to be we all watched Ed Sullivan and the Beatles. Duh. We all liked Elvis Presley. Duh. There was a top 40. Well, there isn't a top 40 anymore. There's this incredibly thin thing, they call it the long tail. There's a couple of things that pop through that, American Idol or whatever might pop through, and a lot of people gather around it. But mostly, it's a culture that's really thin and long with lots of different choices, so it's really hard to tell your story to people.
Everything that you need to know about building a great creative agency and about what happens in the process to create great Technicolor innovative design is, I think, extremely well represented in a movie from 1939. I wish there was one method that would always work, but in fact it is incredibly fluid and incredibly influenced by the team members. So taking a look at the process, I looked back and I thought, well, what in this movie, where are the parts that I think are the formulas where you end up with the best design?
The trendsetters in this hall, and also where I work at ISITE Design, are constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible on the web, from creative design to strategy in user interface, from web standards to just creating compliant code.
I had this problem. What's the best possible moment to diverge from the original Return of the Jedi story and have it go off the rails? And what would happen after it did? And I worked really hard at finding a solution. And after I had the initial idea, of course, I then had to work with Lucasfilm and their continuity people to refine the story. And a lot of people ask me if I had trouble working with Lucasfilm. Licensors are somewhat notorious, I think, for protecting their properties. And honestly, none of the changes they asked for ever gave me any qualms. I see their job as to protect a really well-known property from the likes of a first-time comics writer.
Noticing more. So literally noticing more about their environment, the way you did earlier today, to find offers, bits of information. Remember, they're junkies. They're looking for anything they can use to build that narrative. They have to be changed. So you mentioned this. They have to be willing to be really changed and let go of what we would call your shadow story, a preconceived agenda about where that story might go, even who your character is. You have to be willing to be changed by the other person. And you mentioned listening. Sometimes we say the instruction, listen better, is confusing, but show that you're changed is much simpler. So they have to show that they're changed by the other person and really be willing to do that.
In most cases, they don't quite know what they want, so you have to offer up some options, but you need to be able to talk to them on a creative level and quantify, what's the main thing that they want to get out of what you're about ready to shoot. And it's not always the most obvious thing. It's not always about what is explicitly written in the script. There's contrasting images or contrasting things that are more powerful than the obvious thing, and you need to find out what that fine line is about exactly the elements that they want and how they want to present it.
If this is the farm, the rows are neat and organized, and the machinery that I can expect to go down those rows and pick and harvest the crops, what happens if I say, well, I want to grow a bush that's in a mound instead of a row, or if I want to do something that's a vine? It doesn't fit this institution. It's not conducive as an environment. You need to almost separate out what we like to think of as the greenhouse. And this is a place that is nonlinear. This is a place that's organic. This is a place where you experiment. You're going to have trays of things that are growing but not producing fruit. You're going to have things that are dead. You're going to have things that are inextricably climbing around like a vine around part of the building. That's the nature of creative process, and it's a place that we realized that we needed. We had too finely attuned machine and not enough reaction to how to create something that was truly new or off the mark.
I've always worked on a sliding scale. In fact, I was one of the co-founders of Defunct Theater in town, and I encouraged us to do all of our performances on a sliding scale as well. So which is different than this whole Radiohead pay what you will thing that they did. That doesn't work. I can tell you why. But sliding scale says, hey, we have value. Here's the range of our values. And then we communicate to the customer, when you pay more, that helps somebody else pay less.
Follow my grandfather's adage that you simply work harder than the guy next to you. And two things happen. Others notice that you're doing that, and you do get that much better. So I went into the arts from this sort of Oregon blue-collar loggers attitude of just work real hard. And so I thought you had to work that hard, and I did throughout the early part of my arts, and I think I took what was probably run-of-the-mill artistic aptitude, and I made it go a little further by just pushing it harder. There's a lot of disdain for all things American, and in general we all know this right now, but the design world has not been touched by that. In fact, it's I have not noticed a wrinkle in the sort of the appreciation or schedules of, and in fact, they are aware that it's the innovation and the risk, the pride and lack and ego that we have that makes you able to break through with your creativity and your art.
The book that really blew my mind was a book by Jerry Mander called In the Absence of the Sacred. It was really, the people, how many times people say a book and then you applaud. If you applaud, it's a good book. So yes, write it down and read it. It's incredible. Just be cool with the fact that it may obliterate your life.